The palace corridors of Vienna whispered secrets as Countess Cecilia Castell moved through them like a shadow. Her slender fingers brushed against the ornate wallpaper as she navigated the labyrinthine halls of the Hofburg Palace. She had perfected the art of becoming invisible, a necessary skill for a lady-in-waiting to the Archduchess, especially one with neither wealth nor prominent family connections to protect her. Spring 1897 had arrived in Austria-Hungary with unusual warmth, and the palace windows stood open to welcome the breeze that carried the scent of lilacs from the imperial gardens. Cecilia paused to adjust her modest grey dress, smoothing wrinkles that weren't there, a habit born of perpetual anxiety about her appearance. The other ladies-in-waiting came from noble families with ancient names and fortunes to match. Cecilia, however, had only her deceased father's reputation as a respected scholar and her mother's distant relation to a minor Hungarian noble to recommend her. Empress Elizabeth had taken pity on the orphan girl and secured her this position 4 years ago, when Cecilia was merely 17. Now, at 21, she had learned the complex choreography of court life, when to speak, when to remain silent, when to lower her eyes, and when it was safe to observe. And she had been observing Count Alexander Kovács for months. The Hungarian diplomat had arrived in Vienna last autumn, part of a delegation meant to ease tensions between the dual monarchies. Tall and broad-shouldered, with serious eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, Alexander stood apart from the frivolous courtiers who populated palace life. His dark hair was always neatly trimmed, his clothing impeccable but never ostentatious. Unlike the Austrian nobles who treated the Hungarians with barely concealed condescension, he carried himself with quiet dignity. Cecilia had first noticed him in the imperial library. While most courtiers used the magnificent room as a backdrop for flirtations, Alexander could be found there at odd hours, genuinely engrossed in dusty tomes of history and philosophy. Cecilia, who had inherited her father's love of literature, found herself inventing reasons to visit the library whenever she could be spared from her duties. They had never properly spoken. A greeting here, a polite nod there, the rigid stratification of court society prevented more. Yet she had committed to memory the cadence of his voice, the way he absently touched his signet ring when deep in thought, how he always selected a specific chair by the eastern window where the morning light illuminated his reading. Lost in these thoughts, Cecilia nearly collided with Baron Newman, the Emperor's privy secretary, as she rounded a corner. "Do mind where you're going, girl," he snapped, his thin lips curling with disdain. "My sincere apologies, Baron," Cecilia murmured, dropping into a curtsy. The Baron gave her a dismissive look before continuing on his way, muttering something about charity cases that she pretended not to hear. Such encounters were common enough. Cecilia had developed a protective shell against slights both subtle and overt. She straightened her shoulders and continued toward the Archduchess's chambers, where she would assist with correspondence until luncheon. "There you are, Cecilia," said the Archduchess Sophia when she entered the sunlit sitting room. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd gotten lost in one of your daydreams again." "Never while on duty, Your Imperial Highness," Cecilia replied with a smile, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. The Archduchess, a woman of 40 with kind eyes and an increasing disillusionment with court politics, gestured to the writing desk. 26 responses to the charity ball invitations, and the Baroness von Schomburg has sent another 4-page letter about her son's diplomatic ambitions. I'll need your assistance deciphering her abominable handwriting. Cecilia settled at the desk, arranging stationery and ink. This was comfortable territory, the organization of social affairs, the careful navigation of court relationships through the medium of correspondence. Here, at least, her education and attention to detail made her valuable. As she worked, her mind drifted again to Alexander. She had overheard that his diplomatic mission had been extended for another 6 months. 6 more months of glimpsing him across crowded ballrooms, of watching him in the library, of imagining conversations that would never happen. The Archduchess's voice broke into her thoughts. "You're blushing, Cecilia. Has some young count finally caught your eye?" Cecilia's fingers fumbled with the letter she was folding. "No, Your Highness. I was merely thinking of the warm weather." The older woman laughed softly. "In April? Come now, I've known you too long for such transparent deflections. Who is he?" Hesitating, Cecilia kept her eyes on the desk. The Archduchess had always shown her kindness, but court gossip was a dangerous currency. "There is no he, Your Highness. At least, none who would notice someone like me." The Archduchess studied her thoughtfully. "You underestimate yourself, my dear. But I won't press you further, for now." They returned to their work, but Sophia's observation had unsettled Cecilia. Was her infatuation so obvious? She resolved to guard her expressions more carefully, especially around those less kindly disposed toward her than the Archduchess. That evening, as the imperial household prepared for a musicale in the small gallery, Cecilia helped the Archduchess select jewelry appropriate for the semi-formal occasion. "The pearl and diamond brooch, I think," Sophia decided. "And Cecilia, you shall attend tonight as a guest rather than waiting on me." Cecilia looked up in surprise. "Your Highness? Lady Esterhazy has fallen ill, leaving an empty seat. It would be a shame to waste it." The Archduchess waved away Cecilia's stammered objections. "Wear your blue dress, the one with the silver embroidery. It suits your coloring." The blue dress was Cecilia's finest, a gift from the Empress on her 20th birthday. She had worn it only twice before, hoarding it like a treasure for truly special occasions. But Cecilia began. "It's decided," the Archduchess said firmly. "Besides, Maestro Schumann is performing Schubert tonight. I know how you love Schubert." An hour later, Cecilia found herself seated in the small gallery among the elite of Vienna, trying not to fidget with her gloves or touch her carefully arranged hair. She was positioned toward the back, which suited her perfectly, visible enough to justify her presence, yet not so prominently placed as to invite scrutiny. When Alexander Kovács entered with several other Hungarian officials, Cecilia's heart performed a complicated maneuver in her chest. He looked particularly handsome in formal evening attire, his posture straight and proud. To her dismay, he was seated almost directly across from her, with only the center aisle separating them. Throughout Schumann's brilliant interpretation of Schubert's Impromptu in G-flat major, Cecilia forced herself to focus on the music rather than steal glances at Alexander. But during the second piece, she felt someone watching her. Turning slightly, she met Alexander's gaze directly for the first time. He didn't look away immediately, as protocol might have dictated. Instead, his expression registered surprise, followed by what appeared to be recognition, and then, most astonishing of all, a small, private smile before he returned his attention to the performance. Cecilia felt heat rush to her face. Had he truly recognized her? Or was it merely politeness extended to someone he vaguely recalled seeing in the palace halls? After the musicale, guests mingled over champagne and light refreshments. Cecilia stayed close to the Archduchess, fulfilling her usual role despite her temporary elevation in status. She was pouring tea for an elderly countess when she felt a presence at her elbow. "Pardon me, but we have not been formally introduced," came a deep voice with the distinctive rhythm of Hungarian accented German. "I am Count Alexander Kovács." Cecilia nearly dropped the teapot. She set it down carefully before turning to face him, remembering to curtsy. "Count Kovács. I am Cecilia Castell, lady-in-waiting to Her Imperial Highness." "Miss Castell," he said, as though testing the sound of her name. "I believe we share an appreciation for the Imperial Library. You notice me there." The words escaped before she could consider their impropriety. His eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, she now saw, crinkled at the corners. It would be difficult not to notice someone who reads Goethe's Faust with such absorption that she fails to hear the dinner bell. Cecilia felt mortified. "That happened only once," she said, then bit her lip. She was admitting to having observed him as well. Alexander's smile deepened. Once is memorable enough. Especially when the young lady in question nearly collided with Baron Newman in her haste to depart. "You seem to have been paying rather close attention, Count," said the Archduchess, who had approached without either of them noticing. Her tone was light, but her eyes were evaluating. Alexander bowed deeply. "Your Imperial Highness. I hope I haven't overstepped in introducing myself to Miss Castell." "Not at all. Cecilia's literary interests are well known to her friends." The Archduchess gave Cecilia a meaningful glance. "Though I'm surprised you recognized her tonight. She's usually much more subdued in appearance." "Some people shine regardless of their setting, Your Highness," Alexander replied with unexpected warmth. The Archduchess raised an eyebrow. "Indeed. Well, Count Kovács, since you and Cecilia share scholarly interests, perhaps you would find value in visiting our botanical archives. They contain some fascinating Hungarian specimens, I believe. Cecilia could show you tomorrow afternoon, if her duties permit." Before Cecilia could process what was happening, the Archduchess had effectively arranged a chaperoned but private meeting, then drifted away to speak with other guests. Alexander looked as surprised as Cecilia felt. "Is Her Highness always so decisive?" "Yes," Cecilia managed. "Though I'm not sure why she's taken this particular interest. Perhaps she recognizes a fellow bookworm when she sees one," he suggested, his expression both amused and thoughtful. "Would tomorrow at 3 o'clock be convenient? I wouldn't wish to interfere with your duties." 3 o'clock would be suitable," Cecilia replied, striving for composure despite the riot of emotions beneath her calm exterior. As they parted, Alexander bowed over her hand. "Until tomorrow, Miss Castell." Cecilia barely slept that night, alternating between elation and anxiety. By morning, anxiety had gained the upper hand. What could she possibly have to offer someone like Count Kovács? He was educated at the finest universities, had traveled throughout Europe, and moved in diplomatic circles far above her station. Their conversation would reveal her limitations, and whatever interest he had shown would evaporate like morning mist. The Archduchess, noting Cecilia's distraction, finally pulled her aside after lunch. "My dear, you look positively haunted. Are you ill?" "No, Your Highness, just concerned about this afternoon." Sophia's expression softened. "Ah. Count Kovács. I don't understand why you arranged it," Cecilia confessed. "He is a diplomat and a nobleman. I am merely an intelligent, cultured young woman who deserves more than to spend her youth fading into wallpaper," the Archduchess interrupted firmly. "Besides, I've spoken with the Count several times. He's not like the others." "In what way?" "He values substance over status. His own position came through merit, not merely birth. The Emperor holds him in high regard." Sophia paused. "And I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." Cecilia's heart skipped. "Surely you're mistaken. I've navigated court politics for 25 years, child. I'm rarely mistaken about such things." The Archduchess smiled. "Now go change into something suitable for the archives. They're terribly dusty." At precisely 3 o'clock, Cecilia met Alexander at the entrance to the palace's botanical archives, a collection of illustrated volumes, pressed specimens, and scientific correspondences housed in a quiet wing of the complex. She had chosen a simple day dress in moss green, practical for the environment yet flattering to her auburn hair and fair skin. Alexander was already waiting, dressed more casually than she had yet seen him, in a jacket without tails and an open collar. He smiled when he saw her, his expression warming in a way that made her previous anxiety seem foolish. "Miss Castell. Thank you for agreeing to be my guide. I'm not certain how much guidance I can offer, she admitted as they entered the first chamber of the archives. I've only visited a few times myself. Then we shall explore together, he suggested. Though I confess, the botanical archives were merely an excuse. I've wanted to speak with you properly since I first saw you in the library last November. Cecilia nearly stumbled. November? But that was when you first arrived at court. Yes, he said simply. I noticed you immediately, a young woman completely lost in Schiller while courtiers flirted and gossiped around her. You seemed authentic in a way few people are here. They moved deeper into the archives, where tall windows illuminated cabinets filled with botanical drawings and preserved specimens. Cecilia struggled to reconcile his words with her perception of herself as invisible. I'm surprised you would remember someone so unremarkable, she said finally. Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her directly. Is that truly how you see yourself? Unremarkable. The intensity of his gaze made her uncomfortable. It's how the world sees me, Count Kovács. I have neither fortune nor distinguished lineage. And yet you have something far rarer, a curious mind and an honest heart. He gestured to their surroundings. Look at these specimens, carefully preserved and catalogued. On the surface, many appear plain, even drab. Yet each contains properties and potentials that make them invaluable to those who understand their true nature. Are you comparing me to a dried plant, Count? Cecilia asked, unable to suppress a smile. He laughed, the sound echoing pleasantly in the quiet room. Perhaps not my most elegant metaphor. What I mean to say is that value isn't always visible to the casual observer. Their conversation flowed more easily after that moment of honesty. They discovered shared interests beyond literature, a fascination with natural history, an appreciation for Chopin, a preference for autumn over spring. Alexander spoke of his childhood in Budapest, where his father, a professor of jurisprudence, had encouraged his intellectual pursuits even as political unrest shaped their world. And your family? He asked as they examined a collection of Hungarian wildflowers preserved between glass plates. Both gone now, Cecilia replied. My father was an academic, he taught ancient languages at the university in Graz. My mother came from minor Hungarian nobility, though her family disowned her when she married beneath her station. Ah, Alexander said softly. So you have Hungarian blood. A quarter, she confirmed. Though I've never visited the country. Perhaps someday you will. There was something in his tone, a suggestion, a possibility, that made her glance up quickly, but his expression revealed nothing beyond polite interest. They spent nearly 2 hours exploring the archives, discovering rare botanical illustrations and scientific correspondence between imperial botanists and their counterparts across Europe. As they prepared to leave, Alexander hesitated. I have enjoyed our conversation immensely, Miss Castell. Might I hope for the opportunity to continue it another day? Cecilia knew she should politely defer, suggest that they might encounter each other at court functions, maintain the careful distance that propriety demanded. Instead, she heard herself say, I would like that very much, Count Kovács. His smile was worth whatever breach of etiquette she had committed. Alexander, please. At least when we're not surrounded by the court. Alexander, she repeated, feeling a strange thrill at the informal address. Then you must call me Cecilia. As they parted in the main corridor, he took her hand briefly. Until next time, Cecilia. She watched him walk away, his tall figure straight and confident, and wondered if she had imagined the entire afternoon. But 3 days later, a page delivered a small package to her quarters. Inside was a slim volume of Hungarian poetry in German translation, with a simple note, for our next discussion. A. Over the following weeks, their meetings continued, always in public spaces yet somehow intimate. The palace gardens, the portrait gallery, the imperial conservatory, each became a sanctuary where they could speak freely, shielded by the pretense of cultural exchange. They were careful to maintain propriety, always in view of others yet rarely overheard. Alexander's diplomatic duties frequently took him away from the palace, sometimes for days at a time. During these absences, Cecilia found herself returning to their conversation spots, recalling his observations, imagining what he might say about a particular painting or plant. After one such absence, longer than usual, she received another package. This time it contained a leather journal with blank pages and a note, for thoughts too precious to leave unwritten. That night, Cecilia began to write, not a diary of daily events, but reflections, observations, fragments of poetry that came to her in quiet moments. She wrote about the quality of light in the palace gardens at dawn, about the expression of joy on a child's face in the Imperial Park, about the feeling of recognition when encountering a particularly truthful line of poetry. And, increasingly, she wrote about Alexander. Not directly, she would never risk committing his name to paper, but in careful allusions and veiled references that would mean nothing to anyone else. Her feelings, too complex and fragile for spoken words, flowed more easily through her pen. What had begun as a record of thoughts became a kind of letter, words she could never say aloud but needed to express. She wrote about seeing nobility in quiet dignity rather than titles, about the rare joy of being truly understood, about yearning for a world where hearts could speak directly to one another without the interference of rank and protocol. The journal became her confidant, the repository of an affection she dared not name even to herself. She never intended for Alexander to see these private reflections. The writing itself was the release, the comfort, the one space where she could be entirely honest. June arrived, bringing with it the height of the social season. Balls, garden parties, and official functions filled the court calendar, leaving Cecilia little time for either writing or private conversations with Alexander. They exchanged glances across crowded rooms, shared brief greetings in passing, but meaningful interaction proved impossible. At a garden reception celebrating the Emperor's name day, Cecilia was helping the Archduchess receive guests when Alexander arrived with the Hungarian delegation. As he bowed over Sophia's hand, Cecilia could feel his awareness of her, standing slightly behind her mistress. "Count Kovács," the Archduchess said warmly. "We've missed your contributions to our literary discussions these past weeks." "Your Highness is too kind. Diplomatic obligations have kept me fully occupied," he replied, his eyes briefly meeting Cecilia's. "Though I have continued my personal studies with material recommended by Miss Castell." Sophia glanced between them, a small smile playing at her lips. "Indeed? How fortunate that Cecilia's literary taste extends beyond the usual romantic novels favored by young ladies." "Most fortunate," Alexander agreed, his formal tone belied by the warmth in his eyes. Later, as musicians played and couples promenaded through the gardens, Cecilia found a moment of respite near the rose trellises. The Archduchess was deep in conversation with a Russian Grand Duchess, requiring no immediate attention. "Beautiful evening," came Alexander's voice from behind her. Cecilia turned, her heart quickening. "It is. Though rather warm for June. May I?" He gestured to the bench beside her. She nodded, smoothing her pale yellow gown as he sat at a respectable distance. "I've missed our conversations," he said quietly, his gaze on the milling courtiers rather than on her. "As have I," she admitted. "Your diplomatic duties keep you very busy." "Too busy," he agreed. "Though they may soon lead to a significant change." Something in his tone made Cecilia look at him sharply. "What sort of change?" Alexander hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've been offered a position in Budapest. A permanent appointment to the Hungarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs." The world seemed to still around her. "You would leave Vienna?" "It is a considerable advancement," he said, his voice neutral. "One that would provide security and status beyond my current position." Of course, Cecilia managed. Congratulations. It sounds like a wonderful opportunity. I haven't accepted yet. Those 4 words hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Why not? She asked, barely above a whisper. Alexander finally turned to look at her directly, his expression unguarded. Because there are considerations beyond career advancement. Attachments formed that would be difficult to sever. Before Cecilia could respond, Lady Esterhazy approached, effectively ending their private conversation. Alexander stood, bowed to both ladies, and excused himself with perfect courtesy. For the remainder of the evening, Cecilia performed her duties mechanically, her mind replaying Alexander's words. Attachments formed. Was he referring to her? Or was she interpreting his polite friendship through the lens of her own feelings? That night, she wrote feverishly in her journal, pouring out her confusion, hope, and fear. Would he leave Vienna? Did she matter enough to influence such an important decision? What future could possibly exist for a Hungarian count and a lady-in-waiting with no fortune or connections? The next morning brought unexpected news. The Archduchess summoned Cecilia to her private sitting room, her expression unusually serious. The Empress has requested that I accompany her to Bad Ischl next week, she announced. The mountain air is recommended for her health. We will remain there until August. Of course, Your Highness. I'll begin preparations immediately, Cecilia replied, mentally cataloguing the extensive packing required for such a journey. That won't be necessary, Sophia said gently. The Empress has specifically requested a minimal entourage. Lady Esterhazy will accompany me as my senior lady-in-waiting. You and the others will remain in Vienna. Cecilia tried to hide her disappointment. Bad Ischl in summer was beautiful, a welcome respite from Vienna's heat and formality. The Archduchess continued, you will, however, manage my correspondence while I'm away. Baron Newman will forward official documents requiring my attention, but personal letters can be handled here. I understand, Your Highness. I'll ensure everything is managed properly. I know you will. Sophia paused, studying Cecilia's face. This arrangement will give you some additional freedom in the coming weeks. Perhaps an opportunity to consider your future. Something in her tone made Cecilia look up sharply. My future, Your Highness? Yes. You're 21 now, Cecilia. Have you never thought beyond life as a lady-in-waiting? I'm grateful for my position. Without your generosity, nonsense, the Archduchess interrupted. Your service has been valuable to me. But a young woman of your intelligence and sensitivity might aspire to more than perpetually standing in someone else's shadow. Cecilia felt unbalanced by the conversation's turn. What alternatives would be available to someone of my position? That depends entirely on what you truly want, Sophia replied cryptically. And perhaps whom? Before Cecilia could respond to this extraordinary statement, the Archduchess changed the subject, discussing practical arrangements for her absence. But the implication lingered in Cecilia's mind throughout the day. That evening, returning to her small quarters after dinner, Cecilia discovered her journal was missing from its usual place beneath her pillow. Panic flashed through her as she searched frantically, overturning bed linens and checking drawers she knew she had unused. A soft knock interrupted her search. Opening the door, she found a palace page holding a small package. For Miss Castell, the boy said, handing it to her before hurrying away. With trembling hands, Cecilia opened the package. Inside was her journal, along with a folded note in familiar handwriting. I found this in the conservatory. It appears to have fallen from your pocket during your last visit. I confess I opened it to identify its owner. Forgive me. Horror washed over her as the implications became clear. Alexander had found her journal. Had he read it? How much had he seen? The entries contained her most private thoughts, including veiled but unmistakable references to her feelings for him. Cecilia sank onto her bed, mortification burning through her. She opened the journal with trepidation, half expecting to find comments or reactions in the margins. There were none, but a pressed forget-me-not flower had been placed between the pages of her most recent entry, the one written after the garden reception, where she had wondered if he might stay in Vienna for her sake. Was the flower a message? A gentle rejection? A request to forget improper feelings? Or something else entirely? Sleep eluded her that night. By morning, she had decided her only recourse was to face the situation directly. She would seek out Alexander, apologize for the inappropriate nature of her writings, and assure him that she expected nothing. Finding him, however, proved difficult. He wasn't in the library at his usual hours, nor did he appear at court functions over the next 2 days. Eventually, she learned from a Hungarian attaché that Count Kovács had been sent to Bratislava on urgent diplomatic business. The Archduchess departed for Bad Ischl with minimal fanfare, leaving Cecilia with reduced duties and too much time to dwell on her embarrassment. She threw herself into managing Sophia's correspondence, finding solace in the structured task of sorting, responding to, and forwarding letters. A week passed with no word from Alexander. Cecilia began to accept that perhaps this was his answer, a tactful withdrawal to spare them both further awkwardness. She stopped looking for him in the palace corridors, stopped hoping each knock at the door might be a message from him. Then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon as she worked in the Archduchess's study, the door opened to admit Alexander himself. He looked tired, his usually impeccable appearance showing signs of hasty preparation, but his eyes brightened when they fell on her. "Cecilia," he said, closing the door behind him. She stood, clutching a stack of letters like a shield. "Count Kovács. I didn't realize you had returned to Vienna." "Only this morning," he replied, taking a step toward her. "Forgive my intrusion. I was told I might find you here." "The Archduchess is in Bad Ischl," Cecilia said unnecessarily. "I'm managing her correspondence." "I know. It's you I came to see." Cecilia set down the letters, steadying herself against the desk. "If this is about my journal, I must apologize. Those writings were private reflections, never intended." "I read only enough to identify the owner," Alexander interrupted gently. "When I realized it was yours, I should have closed it immediately. But I saw my name, and I continued reading." Cecilia closed her eyes briefly, humiliation washing over her anew. "Then you know." "I know that you've expressed in writing what I've felt since November but lacked the courage to say." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the earnestness in his expression. "Cecilia, your words weren't an embarrassment. They were a gift." She looked up at him, uncertain she had heard correctly. "A gift?" "The most precious kind." He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "You wrote of seeing beyond titles to the person beneath. Of finding meaning in quiet conversations rather than grand declarations. Of wishing for a world where hearts could speak directly. You memorized it," she whispered, astonished. "Some passages, yes. They expressed what I felt but couldn't articulate." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "I've been in Bratislava not only for diplomatic business, but to speak with my family. To make arrangements. Arrangements. For a future I barely dared imagine until I read your words." Alexander's voice was low, intimate. "I've declined the position in Budapest." Cecilia's breath caught. "But your career will continue here in Vienna, where I've been offered a permanent diplomatic post." His eyes held hers. "Where you are." "Alexander, I have nothing to offer. No dowry, no connections of value, you have yourself," he said simply. "Your mind, your heart, your quiet courage. I've watched you navigate a court that often treats you as invisible, maintaining your dignity and kindness. I've seen your intelligence, your appreciation for beauty, your resilience. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. I should court you properly, over months, with formal permission and chaperone visits. But I fear if I wait, circumstance or duty will separate us. Opening the box, he revealed a ring, not an ostentatious diamond, but a delicate band of gold set with a small sapphire surrounded by tiny pearls. This belonged to my grandmother, he explained. Like you, she married across boundaries of class and expectation. Their love lasted 50 years. Cecilia stared at the ring, then at Alexander's face, scarcely believing what was happening. Are you asking? I'm asking if you might consider a future with me, he said. Not as a lady-in-waiting, but as my wife. My partner. My equal in all things that truly matter. Tears blurred her vision. People will talk. They'll say you married beneath you. Let them talk, Alexander said firmly. We know the truth, that I'm the fortunate one, to have found someone who sees me clearly and loves what she sees. I do, Cecilia whispered. I have from the beginning. As have I, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Your journal merely gave me the courage to acknowledge it. He took the ring from its box. Cecilia Castell, will you marry me? Yes, she said, the single word containing all the certainty her heart possessed. Yes, Alexander. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a soft knock came at the door. They stepped apart quickly, Cecilia hiding her hand in the folds of her skirt as the door opened to reveal the Archduchess's secretary. Miss Castell, excuse me. I didn't realize you had a visitor. Count Kovács was just consulting me about a Hungarian translation, Cecilia improvised, her cheeks flushed. The secretary looked skeptical but nodded. Very well. When you're finished, Her Imperial Highness has sent specific instructions regarding her correspondence that require your immediate attention. After he departed, Alexander took Cecilia's hand again, smiling at the ring now adorning it. I should let you attend to your duties. But perhaps we might continue our translation discussion over dinner? I've taken the liberty of speaking with the Archduchess's steward. You seem very confident of my answer, Cecilia observed, though she couldn't suppress her own smile. Not confident, he corrected. Hopeful. There's a difference. As he moved to leave, Cecilia suddenly remembered something. The forget-me-not in my journal. Was that your message to me? Alexander paused at the door, his expression softening. It was. In the language of flowers, forget-me-nots mean true love and memories, Cecilia finished. I know. His smile deepened. Of course you do. Until dinner, then, my literary scholar. After he had gone, Cecilia looked down at the ring glinting on her finger, a tangible symbol of a future she had only dared imagine in the private pages of her journal. Words written without expectation of being read had somehow found their way to the one person who needed to read them. Her silent love letters, never meant to be sent, had delivered her heart to its destination after all.